Patrick and I had the chance to have a very quick chat yesterday, and what sticks in my mind is that you said not only are there different classifications, but some belong to the future, and some are definitely sort of the old world, more like sort of 20th century versus 21st century. What difference does it make whether it's a new trade agreement or whether it's an old trade agreement, and also, I mean, an old-fashioned trade agreement, and does it have a difference in the effect it has on the non-participatory parties, nations?
Yeah, to put it extremely simply, starting point is that opening trade is good for welfare under a number of conditions. We're not discussing the conditions here. So the important question is, how do you remove obstacle to trade? Obstacle to trade are of two different natures. Some are there to protect producers from foreign competitors, tariffs, subsidies. Others are there to protect consumers from risks. Norms, standards, safety requirement, pesticide residues, size of bumpers, safety of toys, lighters, and so on. That's for the obstacle to trade that depends on governments. Of course, there's also a lot of other obstacles to trade that, for instance, have to do with distance, but technology is taking care of that. So let technology do its work on crushing the cost of distance, and let's focus on what governments can do. And this is where you enter into this spaghetti bowl of various agreements, the number of which doesn't matter. Not least because most of these agreements are not used by business. In theory, 60% of world trade is covered by preferential agreements. In reality, 15% of world trade takes place according to the standards of these preferential agreements, for reasons we can explain. Now, and then I'm coming to direct answer to your question. If you look at what we have in the picture and what we have in the making, you basically have three generations of agreements. The Jurassic one, the modern one, and the futuristic one. Now, the Jurassic is GATT, NAFTA, WTO. And the Jurassic is 80% about removing protection of producers and 20% about other issues that have to do with trade regulation, anti-dumping, anti-subsidies, and so on. But the main focus is reducing measures, the purpose of which is to protect the producer. And this is Jurassic because as global value chains proliferate, shooting on your imports makes less and less sense. It did make sense when the import content of exports was 20%. Now that the import content of exports is leading to 60%, shooting on your imports means that you deteriorate your exports. So this is dead. There still is a bit of that in the system, but this is dead. Then you have the modern generation, which is the TPP, which is 20% about removing protection for producers, very modest content of trade opening through producer protection. I mean, of course, the Australians got 65 million tons of sugar on the US market. You know, negotiating 6 years to get 65 million ton increase in sugar quota on the US market is not really worth the money you spend in negotiations. So the strict classical trade opening through product protection reduction is very modest in TPP. But where it matters is that they've done a great step in linking trade opening, the trade regime, with labor provisions, with environmental provisions, and with anti-corruption provisions, which are issues which developing countries had always extremely firmly resisted linking to trade in global trade negotiations. So the US got a real breakthrough there, and it's a big political victory, especially for a Democrat administration, to be able to get from developing countries in the Pacific region what they always refused. And then you have the third generation, which is the futuristic one, which is TTIP, which is 80% about precaution and 20% about protection. Now, there remains a little bit of that transatlantic. It's all about how do you operate convergence in precaution level and precaution administration. The breakthrough in TPP is of no use for TTIP for a simple reason, which is that transatlantic, European and American labor and trade, or environment and trade, or corruption and trade are the same. So there's nothing to be gained transatlantic on these issues because US and EU are at the same level, much higher, of course, than the rest of the world. So it's mostly about precaution. And of course, as Petra would probably tell you, dealing with precaution is a totally different ballgame than dealing with protection, which is why critics like her have got an open road, given how bad the US and the Europeans have been at presenting the narrative of TTIP.